Hi, it's Karolyn. I'm here to help you learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to decorate this adorable koala bear cake. And I don't know if you saw my video a couple weeks ago. I made one of my ugliest cakes that I've ever made and really disappointed one of my best customers. And this was the next cake that I had on the books for her. Now, I did have some issues with this cake, so I'm going to show you how I tear it apart and put it back together. And I think I was in my head because I just wanted this to be perfect because the last cake that I made for her was a mess. So I am starting with my cakes already baked, filled, iced, and they are in the refrigerator waiting to be decorated. I have videos showing you how I bake, fill, ice, refrigerate cakes, make the icing. All of that is going to be linked in the description, and I will also link down there any other videos that I reference and all of the tools that I use. And I will also let you know how much I charged for this cake. So let's get started. All right, let's make the Rice Krispie treats. I have 10 ounces of marshmallows. I just put that in a glass bowl and I stuck that in the microwave for about a minute 45 seconds. And now I'm just stirring it. And I have some crispy rice. This ain't no Snap, Crackle, and Pop. This is the generic brand, but I just eyeball it. So I did about 2 cups of rice and then I stirred it, and it's too marshmallowy. So I added another cup and stirred it and added another cup until it gets to a consistency where there's not too much marshmallow. It's like a good marshmallow to crispy ratio. And then I'm just going to set that aside to cool down for like 10 minutes. Now I'm putting this on a 5-inch cake, but after I frost the cake, it's about 6 inches on the top. So I have a 6-inch cake pan so I can make sure that I'm making this the right size. I broke the Rice Krispies into 2 pieces, and I'm rolling one into a ball for the head, and then I'm rolling the other part into a cone shape, and I'm smacking it against the counter so it can get really flat. And do you see how it's wider at the bottom and more narrow at the top? So I'm just trying to shape it. I put it on the cake pan to make sure that it is the right size, and that looks good. I'm going to sprinkle down some cornstarch and set that aside. And now, like I say in all of my videos, I have Gum-Tex powder, Tylose powder, CMC powder. It's all the same thing. It is mixed into my fondant. I only use marshmallow fondant, and this is going to help the fondant set a little harder. It's going to make it so much easier to work with. I will link this in the description for you. Got my cake out of the refrigerator. I need to measure the circumference, so it's 24 inches by about 5 inches tall. I need to know how big I have to roll this tan fondant out. So again, that has that Tylose powder mixed into it. Roll it into a log, sprinkle down some cornstarch, and I'm going to flatten it down with my hands, and I want to roll it tall to make sure it's 5 inches tall before I roll it out really long. We're making the tree bark pattern here. Do you see how thick that is? It's not too thin, not super thick. We need to be able to get this impression mat in there, and I will link that below. So I'm going to press that down onto the fondant to transfer that pattern. And look how amazing that looks. I just love this impression mat. So I'm just realigning it just to transfer the pattern all the way down this entire strip of fondant. And then I'm going to take my pizza cutter and cut a straight edge along the bottom. And remember, I measured the cake. It was 5 inches tall. I want to make this just slightly bigger. So I'm doing 5 1/4 inches. So I'm going to line that 5 1/4 inch down at the bottom. And at the top, I'm making a dotted line with my pizza cutter and then cutting that out. So that entire strip is 5 1/4 inches tall. And I'm using my rulers just to straighten that out. Now I got my cake out of the refrigerator. Remember that icing is cold and solid. I'm not going to mess it up. So I'm getting a little piping gel along the sides and then dipping my paintbrush in water and thinning out that piping gel along the sides. I'm going to take a paper towel and just clean the piping gel off of the bottom. I'm rolling this fondant from one end to the other. It's going to make it easier to transfer on here. I'm going to start in the back of the cake and just press this down. I want to make sure I'm pushing it against the cake so no air bubbles form behind it. Then I'm getting my ruler down and I'm cutting through both pieces to create a perfect seam. Remove the piece behind it and then press that seam together. And look how beautiful that looks. So now I'm taking my hands and I'm kind of pushing the fondant down to the board. I want the fondant to stick up just a little bit over the top of the cake because I'm going to put another piece of fondant on top. You will see what I mean. Let's airbrush this. I have some chocolate brown airbrush coloring. I love that machine. I will link that below. There's the dial to control the spray and the on and off switch. I always have a paper towel to test the spray. And I'm just doing light circular coats. So I'm just barely pulling the trigger back on that and just doing a very light coating of it, and then I'm also doing it along the top. And you have to let it dry. You can't do heavy coats at once. You got to do a little bit of light coats. And then once I have that done, I'm getting really close and just trying to get that inner detail with the airbrush. So I'm trying to get in all these crevices, and then I did let it dry for about 10 minutes, and then I continued again, just getting it a little bit deeper to really bring out that pattern. All right, this is a 7-inch cake, so I have a 7-inch cake pan. It's turned upside down. That's about the size of the circle. I'm going to need to cut that out, so I'm just keeping that pan, and I'm going to put that back in the fridge. Look how cool that looks. Now, I rolled tan fondant out really thin. I have that little turntable here, and I put the fondant on top, and I'm pressing that pan down on top of it to get the impression, and using my pizza cutter to cut that out. Now, I'm using my Dresden tool to make these little lines in the fondant like the rings of a tree. So I'm just moving the turntable with my left hand and pressing the impression in with my Dresden tool, until I get this little pattern in here. And I got my cake out of the refrigerator. I'm getting a little bit of water down on the top so this fondant can glue. You can use shortening, you can use piping gel, whatever you want. And I'm sticking that piece in the top. And I want to make sure that it is coming all the way to the edges. So I'm just pressing it to the edge so it meets the tree bark. And that looks pretty good. Now I just want to airbrush where it meets, just to make it look a little seamless, if you will. And I'm just doing a real light airbrush on the very top as well. And I'm just taking a wet paper towel and removing any airbrush coloring that's on the board. That looks great. Let's put that back in the fridge. Now, I rolled out a bunch of different colors of the fondant really thin. I have this ribbon cutter, and I'm cutting a bunch of ribbons, and I'm straightening them with my ruler. And I set those aside, and I'm washing my hands because I'm going to stack the cake. I got that out of the refrigerator. I'm using my sewing ruler to measure how tall these straws need to be. I'm marking with a marker just past the edge of the ruler, and then I'm cutting that marker off and tossing that piece in the trash. I put the straws in the bottom tier, get some buttercream icing down, and I have a tutorial where I go into complete detail on how I stack cakes. I'm going to link that in the description for you. So I put that top tier on, make sure it's level, hammer a dowel all the way through the cake into the cake board, and fill in the hole with some icing. Now I'm cutting a straight edge on the bottom of all of these stripes, getting a little bit of water behind each one, and starting in the back, and I'm putting it down and making sure it's perfectly vertical. I have these offset scissors, and I just cut the top off to make sure it's even with the top of the cake. And then after I put a few of these on, I hated the way that it looked. So we are peeling all of these off, and we are not doing stripes because it looks stupid. So I'm dipping my paintbrush in some water, and I'm just trying to get rid of any of that color that transferred onto the icing. And I need to disassemble this. So that icing is still solid. I can get a spatula underneath there and lift this up without ruining it because that cake is still cold. Look how that color set up. Look how it looked on the right when I put it in the refrigerator after I lightly sprayed it, and after it sat for a couple hours in the fridge, it turned orange. It looks horrible. I need to disassemble this. So I am pulling that dowel out of there, and I also need to scrape that excess icing off of the top. And I was super annoyed. This has not happened to me before. I did not spray thick coats of the airbrush coloring. I did really thin coats, let them dry, and it turned orange. So I have to fix this. So I took a paper towel. I'm like, maybe I can lift some of the color with the paper towel, and that didn't work. So I am just going to stick this back in the refrigerator for an hour or two so it can solidify, and I will take care of it later. And I'm just going to let that top tier sit out so the icing can get soft, and I can use an impression mat in it instead. So I'm just going to set that aside, and I'm redoing the top part, that round circle, the round circle that I put in the top of the tree. So I rolled out the tan fondant again, and I cut the circle out, and I made the impressions in it. And then I'm going to get my cake out of the refrigerator and disassemble this. So that cake is cold. It was in there for about an hour. I'm using my tweezers, and I'm pulling all of the straws out. And then I'm using a palette knife to kind of start to peel this up so I can lift that off of the cake, and I just got to toss that. And I'm putting that new piece down. So again, I want to make sure that it is touching the edges. And I have to kind of lift it up with a palette knife and stretch it a little bit so it touches the edge here. And I'm pressing down just to find where the straws go, and then I can put the straws back into the cake, and I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. So now I'm going to do the fondant brown instead of tan. And so I thought maybe it's because I started with the fondant too light. So I'm doing brown fondant, doing the same process, cutting it straight on the bottom, measuring how tall it has to be, and connecting my dotted line. And then I'm going to peel this off because look how orange that looks. It looks stupid. So I'm just carefully peeling that off. That was sitting in the fridge, and that icing is solid, and I'm not messing it up as I do this. So again, getting a little bit of piping gel and thinning it out with some water on the sides of the cake. And then I'm going to roll that onto the side like we did earlier and cut it, make the seam, press the seam together. And now I need to get a little bit of water at the very top where it meets that tan piece so I can push it together and it will stick. And that looks a lot better. Let's put that back in the fridge. Now I want to make the impression mat. This was sitting out for about an hour or so, and I have this line impression mat. I can try to see if they still make it and find it. I've had this forever. Look, it has a huge crack in the top, but I love this thing. So I'm just pressing this against the side of the cake and just transferring this line impression on there. And I have a video talking about how I use impression mats on buttercream, and I will link that in the description. And that looks good. Now I'm taking a spatula and I wet it under the faucet, and I'm just using that water to smooth out the top so it looks nice and pretty. And that looks good. I'm going to put that back in the fridge. Now let's try this again. I got that out of the refrigerator. I'm dusting all that cornstarch off of there with a dry paintbrush, and I'm just going to do a very, very light coat of airbrush coloring on here just to deepen the color and bring out a little bit of the detail. Very light. I'm holding it far away. I'm using a very light spray just to give it a little dimension. And then again, just getting into those little crevices. I am barely spraying any airbrush coloring on here. I just want to bring out the detail and then wiping the board with my paper towel, and that looks good. Let's put that back in the fridge. Hopefully this works. Now I let those sit out for about 24 hours and they're really cold, and I can press it against the countertop to smooth out the Rice Krispies and get it into a better shape. So I'm just rolling it into a ball, rolling the cone, and making sure they look good. Now I rolled out green fondant and white fondant really thin, and I have some gray fondant, just a little bit of black food coloring, and I'm rolling this out to make the ears. So I'm rolling it pretty thick. You can see how thick that is, about a ½ inch thick or so. I have these circle cutters, and I want to hold these up against that top, the head, to see how big the ears should be. And I'm going to cut 2 little circles out of the fondant, smoothing my cuts. And let's hold that up there, and that looks like a pretty good size. I'm going to take a really big circle cutter and cut the bottoms off so they can contour to the shape of the head. And that looks pretty good. So now I need to cut the inner pieces, so I'm using a smaller circle to cut the green pieces out, holding it against the side and just using that same big circle cutter to cut the edges off. And I decided I needed to make a little indentation there, so I'm using a ball tool, using my fingers to press that down so that green piece sits inside of the fondant rather than on top. And then I had to refine it, so after I pressed it down, it misshapen the ears, so I'm just using my circle cutters to refine it and holding that up, and that looks good. I'm going to set those aside. Now I need to cut the white part for the belly, and I cut a circle and I want to stretch it out into kind of like an oval shape, and that looks good. I'm going to set that aside. And now I need to make the legs. So I roll it into a ball, roll it into a cone shape so it's pointier at one end, and then I'm going to make the foot. So I'm pinching it up and then I'm pushing it in on the side so it has the shape of a foot. And now I have to cut the leg so it contours to the body. So I'm starting on the outside and cutting on an angle to the inside, and that way it's going to sit flush against the side like so. And let's do it again. The other foot. So again, rolling it out and pinching it up to make the foot and pushing it in to get the curve and cutting it on an angle from the outside to the inside so it can contour to that Rice Krispie body. Now I'm making the arm, so rolling it into a ball, then rolling it out again where it's pointier on one end. I'm flattening where the hand goes, and then I need to cut it again to contour it to the piece. So I'm starting on the outside and cutting it to the inside. That way it sits flush against the piece. And I'm doing it the same for the other arm. And there we have the arms and the legs. And now let's restack this. So I got that out of the refrigerator and I'm putting the buttercream down just like we did before. And I got that cake was in the fridge for probably about 24 hours before I'm stacking this again, so that icing got really solid. I'm redoweling the cake and then filling that in with the buttercream. And let's set that back in the fridge. Now I have a piece of non-slip pad underneath my cutting board so it doesn't slide around, a wet paper towel with an X-Acto knife, a Dresden tool, and a little bit of water. I printed the name out the size that I wanted it to be, and I'm doing my trace, cut, and smooth method to make the name and the number. So I'm carefully tracing the letters onto the fondant, and then make sure you cut the center pieces out first. You always want to cut the center pieces out before you cut the rest of the piece out. And I'm going to take my tools and my fingers to smooth the edges whenever I make any cuts out of fondant. So once I cut the center pieces out, then I want to cut the full letter out. And again, once I cut anything out of fondant, I'm taking my tools, take my fingers, take the time to smooth the jagged edges. It's going to make it look so much better if you take the time to do this. Realign it on top of the picture so it can dry to the right shape. And I'm going to do that for all of the letters. And I just Googled Maddox name and went to images and found a name, and I printed it out the size that I wanted it to be. Super simple. And now I'm doing the same thing for the number. I have my favorite numbers PDF, and I will link that below, but it has all my favorite numbers that I like to use, and I'm doing the same thing. I traced it onto the fondant, cut it out, smooth my cuts. Now I have this light green fondant. Again, it has that Tylose powder in it, and I need a light green background, so I'm getting a little bit of water behind the number 1 and all of the letters. And when I put the letters down, I'm going to use my tools to make sure that they are perfectly straight. And I'm cutting an even green border around all of the letters and also that number 1. So I'm getting real close, going really slow, and just making sure that that green border is even. And again, lift it up and then take my fingers and smooth my cuts. And now for the name, I'm putting the name on a gray background. So again, I'm doing the same thing, getting a little bit of water behind each of the letters. And then I'm going to cut an even gray border around all of them and smooth my cuts. And let's realign that on the picture, and I'm just going to set that aside to dry until I'm ready to use them. Now let's make this little koala bear. So I got that cake out of the refrigerator. Look how much better that bottom tier looks. It's not orange anymore. So I have some gray American buttercream that I just dyed with a little bit of black food coloring. I have my gloves on, and I am easily adding this fur texture. So you can see I'm just getting the icing on that Rice Krispie treat and just patting it down and trying to get it to look like fur. I'm getting 2 skewers in the bottom, and then I'm sticking that in the top tier, offset to the back a little bit so the legs and feet have some room to come to the front. Then I had to wash all that icing off of my gloves so I could put this white piece on here and not mess it up. And then I'm taking one of the legs and doing the same thing, getting some icing on it and getting it to that fur texture and sticking it against the side, and doing the same thing for the other leg. And carefully putting that on the cake so I don't get icing all over that green icing. And I'm just filling in any spaces. I don't want to see any Rice Krispie treats, so I'm just taking any icing and just filling in those areas. And I'm doing the same thing for the head. Get some icing on the head and just getting it, tapping it on there to get the fur shape, get some skewers in the bottom. And then I'm going to stick that on to the body, making sure that it is in the right position. And just making it look furry and trying to cover up any of that Rice Krispies that is showing through. And I'm doing the same thing for the ear. So I grabbed an ear, getting some icing on there. And then I'm holding up to the side of the head to see where it's going to go. And I'm anchoring 2 toothpicks down so that ear can hook onto the toothpicks and it's not going to fall off. So I'm pressing that in there. So the toothpick and the icing is going to help it attach to the head. And again, do the same thing for the other ear. And then I have to figure out where I want that number 1 to be. And I'm doing the same thing for the arms. So I'm getting some icing on there and putting them against the side of the body. And then getting a little bit of water behind the number 1 and sticking that down and just pressing his hands around the number 1 so it looks like he's holding on to it. And then I want to get a little bit of icing behind the green part of the ear and stick that down. And now I cut out an oval shape for the nose, but I fix it, so I didn't show what I did because I do something different. That was sliding down, so I'm anchoring a toothpick down into the face. And again, I'm going to hook that black nose on there. And I cut little black ovals. I will link the oval cutters in the description, and I stuck them onto the face. And that doesn't look right to me. Something's off. So let's peel that off. And I need to make little indentations where the eyes are going to go. So the eyes are set into the face and not just sticking onto the top of the face. It'll look so much better. So let's fill that in with some icing. I use ball tools to press those crispy treats down. I'll link the ball tools in the description. And sticking those eyes back down. Now they're flush with the piece and it just looks so much better. It doesn't look off. And I'm going to do the nose all over. So I'm rolling black fondant into a ball, and then I'm going to roll it into like an oblong shape and flatten it out a little bit. Koala's noses are really big, and I felt like that oval was too flat. So I like that this has a little bit of thickness to it. Get some icing behind it and anchor that onto the toothpick and press that down. That looks so much better. Now I cut circles out of white fondant and I'm sticking them on here for the whites of the eyes, but I do end up changing this because I didn't like the way that it looked, so I didn't show you how I really did this. I'm just showing you that I'm putting them on there. You see how annoying those little pieces are to work with? So I'm putting some extra fur on here, making sure that it touches the top of that green tier. So I'm just getting some of the icing on a paintbrush and pressing that down there and just tapping it on there to keep that fur texture. And again, just trying to cover any places where I can see Rice Krispie treats or where I want to add a little bit more fur. Doing it to the back of the ears. And do you see how I'm doing this now? I'm putting some icing in the front of the green piece so it looks like the green piece is flush, like not flush, it's down into the ear, right? So the icing is now coming over the green piece and I didn't just stick the green piece on. I rolled out black fondant into really, really tiny lines and cut it straight on one end and it comes to a point on the outer end and made the little eyebrows. And then I changed the whites of the eyes to like a little number 4 tip. I just feel like it looks a little better. I felt like those whites were a little too big. And again, I want to get a little bit of the gray icing around the edges of the eyes so it looks like the eyes are inside of the head and not just stuck to the front of the face. And now that fondant is a little sticky, so I don't even need anything to stick these letters to the fondant because it was a little bit humid and you can see how the fondant is a little shiny. So I'm just sticking the letters to the front of the cake and let's put that back in the refrigerator. Now I am making the leaves. Now, if you know me, you know I don't really make flowers or anything like this, but I could do stuff like this. So I have a leaf cutter. I rolled that green fondant out really thin, and it does have that Tylose powder mixed into it. I have this veiner, and I will link that below, and I'm just rolling the fondant onto that part so it can transfer this little fondant line in there, if you will. So I will have a place to stick this floral wire. Now I have this floral wire I'm cutting into smaller pieces, and I will find all the stuff that I use. I will link in the description, but I'm going to dip that. I have some piping gel here and I'm going to dip the floral wire in there and I'm putting it up that vein that I created. And since that wire is really thin, it doesn't poke out the front or the back of this fondant. And I get a little bit of piping gel at the bottom, so I'm just going to remove that with my fingers. And I need to vein this leaf, so I'm flipping that over, and then I flip the leaf over, and I'm pressing it down with my hand just to transfer those veins onto the fondant. And that looks pretty good. So I'm just going to pinch the edge. So I'm pinching the top of the leaf and the bottom where it wraps around the wire. And then I got some aluminum foil and I'm crumbling it up. So I want to set these leaves on here so they can dry with a shape to them. And I'm going to stick that down on here to dry. And I'm doing it again. So cut the leaf out and then I'm going to roll it onto that veiner to create that line in the leaf. Dip the floral wire in the piping gel and then push it up through the leaf in that vein that I created. So I'm kind of twisting it in there and then I'm pressing it down onto the leaf veiner, pinching the bottom around the wire, pinching the top around the tip. And then I'm going to set it on the aluminum foil to dry. And I just kept repeating this process. I don't even remember how many leaves, but I did a lot of different leaves because I'm making 3 different branches. And you see how the piping gel is like sticking out the bottom, so I just remove that and then vein the leaf and pinch it and shape it. Now we got to bring these to life. So I have a bunch of different green shades of green petal dust and I tapped it into the lid and then I tapped the excess off on the paper towel. And no rhyme or reason, I am just getting some color on these leaves and I'm trying to do a variation of like a light green, a mid green, and a dark green just to get like a different color dimensions in here, if you will. And I'm doing the front and the back of all of these leaves. And that looks good. So now I have some floral tape and I have a thicker gauge green floral wire. I tear that off and I stretch it to activate the stretchy in the tape. And then I'm taking some leaves, and there are other videos on YouTube showing you how to do this, and I'm not really great at explaining it. So I'm getting 2 of the leaves at the top, and do you see how I'm wrapping that tape around it just to hold them together, and I'm trying to get the leaves into a nice shape. And then I grab another leaf and I put it on so they're like staggered, right? And then I'm wrapping the tape around that stem, and I just keep wrapping it around that main core green wire. And as I go down a little further, I grab another leaf and I want them to make the leaves stick out and stagger to the sides. And once I bring that tape down a little bit more, I'm going to grab onto another leaf. So do you see how I'm bringing it down and then I'm going to add a leaf? That way the leaves aren't all in the same place. And you see how I have one going out to the left, one coming out to the right, and that way it's just making it look like a real branch. Making sure that I'm pulling the leaves down and I get them in the right position. This is a lengthy process, but actually the leaves aren't bad. I don't mind making these, but it's flowers that drive me insane. And once I have all the leaves on, then I'm just getting the tape all the way down the stem and then cutting the excess off with my snips. And I grabbed a styrofoam block and I'm just setting that in there while I work on the other one. I'm doing the same thing. I grab another green wire and I'm wrapping the leaves on here with the green floral tape until I get it to the bottom. You see, getting them into the right shape. And again, there are other tutorials on YouTube showing you how to do this. And you may want to, if you want deeper detail on how to do it, you can find someone else to teach you, because I don't really do that all the time. So I got my cake out of the refrigerator and I have these leaf sprays and I want to see, where do I want to put them? I have no idea where I want to do that. So I don't want to stick these directly into the cake. So I have these coffee straws that I'm sliding up around that wire that has the tape on it so that that won't touch the cake. And I'm sliding this into that top tier and just pressing it down so the straw is covered. Perfect. Getting a little bit of icing on a paintbrush, and I'm getting some icing behind the leaves where it's touching the top tier. That way I can also help anchor that to the cake. Getting the leaves in place, and I'm doing the same thing for the next one, getting the wire into the straw. And then I'm cutting the excess off. and sticking that down into the cake, just hiding the straw, and then getting a little bit of icing behind the leaves where it's touching the cake to help hold it and secure it on there. And same thing for the other one, got the straw in there, cut off the excess and press that down and get some icing behind. And now I'm just getting some non-toxic glue around the cake board and wrapping the ribbon around there and pressing that down. And there is the cake. How adorable is that? So there you go. I just love this design. I really like how it turned out, and it was a little stressful. I don't know what the heck happened with that airbrush coloring. That never happened before. I've been using the same airbrush coloring for, I don't know, since the days of yore, and this still happened. All I can think of is that it is a little humid here, and that could have played a part in it, but once I deepened the fondant to that brown and used less airbrush coloring, it seemed to have worked. So it's one of those annoyances with cake decorating that I wanted to include in this video, because if I didn't include it, you wouldn't have known everything that I went through to make this cake. So I had to take the tree bark apart. I had to redo the top tier, which I didn't like those stripes. I didn't think that, I'm glad that I took those stripes off as well. I didn't think it looked good with the design. Now this cake on the inside, the top tier is a 2-layer torted 5-inch. And the bottom tier is a 3-layer non-torted 7-inch. And I have a video talking about torting and not torting your cakes, and when I do and when I don't, and I will link that below. This cake feeds about 25 to 30 people. And how much did I charge? This one was $450, and there was ganache on the inside of the cake, so I added an extra $15 for the ganache. And I have a video showing you how I make the ganache, and I will link that below. So I was super nervous when I sent her this picture. Although I love the cake, you never know what your customers are going to think. So I sent her the picture, and she absolutely loved the cake, and it was like a big weight off of my shoulders. I felt like Dumb and Dumber, you know, when he was like, "You totally redeemed yourself." I even sent her that gif. And I just feel so much better that I disappointed her a few weeks ago, but this cake totally made up for it, and she's super happy, and so am I, and we can move on from that unfortunate incident, which here's the video that I made about that cake, and I will link that below. So what new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I do have a KakeAcademy membership program. I will link that information in the description. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you are enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is below. And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials, and you could check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next. Why do I always say it like that? And hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake. Have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.